Let's see if I remember how to do this. It's good to see everyone. This is The Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman coming to you from New York City. Thanks for finding me. I took 2 weeks off. A lot of you wrote in asking, where are you? And a lot of you requested I never come back. I thought I told everyone via social media that I was taking some time off, and I did. I had been going straight, nonstop for a year. From that first debate between Biden and Trump to Biden dropping out all the way through the convention. I went straight through till Trump finished his first 100 days, and I thought, 2 weeks. I need 2 weeks to restore what's left of my soul. So it's good to see everybody. Thank you for watching and listening. Monday was Memorial Day, in which Americans honor those who paid the ultimate sacrifice, which for Donald Trump means paying your taxes. Donald Trump got 5 draft deferments during the Vietnam War. Some of the deferments claimed he was studying in college. Some other deferments claimed he suffered some kind of foot injury. It's hard to tell which was the bigger lie, that he was going to college or that he had a foot injury. It probably would have been more believable had Trump insisted the bone spurs were in his brain. For some reason, this coward is now our commander-in-chief, and despite calling the men who died in World War I suckers and losers, Trump decided it was time for yet another photo op at Arlington Cemetery. Unlike the one last year, he didn't have to push any female cemetery workers out of the way. He got to deliver a speech honoring America's fallen soldiers. And in his speech, Trump said, quote, "God did that. God did that, and I believe that." So, in a speech honoring the more than 1.3 million American soldiers who died in conflicts ranging from the Revolutionary War to Afghanistan, what did Trump say that God did? According to Trump, God brought the World Cup and the Olympics to the United States for his second term as president. That's what Trump said in his Memorial Day speech. Because that's what the Trump administration is all about, welcoming foreigners into our country. You know, God probably did do that, just to teach him a lesson. But God didn't decide to bring the World Cup and the Olympics to America. FIFA, is it FIFA, and the International Olympics Committee decided on that almost a decade ago because they figured Americans wouldn't be stupid enough to reelect this hump. Well, it had nothing to do with God. By the way, the World Cup is being hosted by the United States, along with Canada and Mexico. ICE is going to be very busy. Last week, Donald Trump, who once referred to his dating life as his own personal Vietnam, spoke to 1,000 graduates at West Point, America's leading military academy. During his speech, Trump spoke out against America's nation-building crusades. That's what he called it. Nation-building crusades. See, Trump doesn't approve of George W. Bush's attempts at nation-building. Trump prefers nation-destroying, especially when it's his own. This is not the first time since he returned to the White House that Trump has criticized George W. Bush's wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. While the war authorization for Iraq has expired, the war authorization for Afghanistan still in place. It was passed 1 week after 9/11. It's the war authorization to fight not just Afghanistan, but the global war on terror. And since then, it has provided presidents the authority to launch missile attacks on or send soldiers into not just Afghanistan, but Pakistan, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, Libya, back into Iraq without needing any further congressional approval. That's why back in March, Trump launched those airstrikes against the Houthis in Yemen, killing hundreds of civilians. He did it without ever asking Congress for permission because of the war authorization passed back in 2001. By the way, while I was away, Trump declared victory over the Houthis and stopped those attacks. But the Houthis continue to bombard Israel every day. Nevertheless, Trump declared victory. See, imaginary enemies are so easy to defeat. As I said, it's not the first time Trump spoke out against the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Last week, Trump drew criticism from his former vice president, Mike Pence, for making similar comments during a recent trip to Saudi Arabia, where Trump said, quote, "In the end, these so-called nation builders wrecked far more nations than they built," unquote. Mike Pence said statements like that are a disservice to the American men and women who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, actually, Mike, perpetuating the lie that Iraq and Afghanistan attacked us on 9/11, that is a disservice to the men and women who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan. The best way to honor our soldiers who died in those two wars is to remind all Americans that the Taliban did not attack us on 9/11. Google that. I'll keep telling you this. Google it. The Taliban had nothing to do with 9/11, but we spent more than 20 years in Afghanistan fighting them. Osama bin Laden was living in the hills of Tora Bora. That doesn't mean the Taliban sanctioned 9/11. Google it. The princes of Saudi Arabia financed 9/11, and the Pakistani military harbored bin Laden after 9/11, which is why when we finally did kill Osama bin Laden, he wasn't living in Afghanistan. He was living in Pakistan, safely tucked away. And the doctor who assisted the CIA in finding bin Laden is now sitting in a Pakistani prison because Osama bin Laden is considered a national hero in Pakistan. We honor our soldiers by speaking the truth. Saddam Hussein wasn't behind 9/11, and he didn't have weapons of mass destruction. Bush and Cheney knew this, but they lied us into that illegal invasion anyway. The same way Donald Trump right now is attempting to invoke the Alien Enemies Act, claiming, believe it or not, our country has been invaded by Venezuela. Somebody should tell the Venezuelan people that. I think that's only polite to let them know that they've invaded us. Donald Trump has declared that America is in a state of war with Venezuela in order to justify rounding up migrants and deporting them, and quite possibly, if Stephen Miller gets his way, suspending habeas corpus, which our head of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, told Congress last week gives the president the right to round up and deport anyone he sees fit. Kristi Noem has no idea what habeas corpus means. The only thing shocking about that would be if she actually knew what habeas corpus meant. In his speech, Trump told the West Point cadets that the military doesn't need any more yes men, because with Trump and Pete Hegseth in charge, the military is already crawling with them. They've got enough yes men to last 10 illegal wars. Trump telling the cadets he doesn't like yes men. Ask E. Jean Carroll or the 50 other women with credible sexual assault allegations against Donald Trump how much Donald Trump enjoys hearing the word no. Trump in his speech said the job of the military is to kill and destroy things. Actually, it's not. The job of the military is to avoid killing and destroying things, especially civilians. But we keep hearing this from Tucker Carlson, J.D. Vance, Sean Hannity. We keep hearing that the job of our military is to kill. That is so insulting to the men and women who wear the uniform. And it's why, according to the Cost of War Project and other people who are in the business of counting the dead, anywhere between 500,000 and 1 million innocent civilians died from combat in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars that we fought. That's not counting the innocent civilians who died from starvation, disease, or lack of medical attention because of the invasion. I'm talking about innocent civilians who died from what our Pentagon calls collateral damage, killed accidentally by our soldiers, by the fighting. Because we have people like Donald Trump saying it's the job of the military to kill people, about 20 times more innocent civilians die during our wars than soldiers. Nobody should be dying, but certainly not the civilians. Civilians should not be dying. 891 Israeli soldiers have died since Hamas invaded Israel on October 7th, 2023. Not including Hamas fighters, more than 50,000 civilians have died in Gaza. That's 50 times as many civilians dying in Gaza as Israeli soldiers. The civilian-to-soldier ratio when it comes to American wars, just as bad, if not worse. It is estimated that the United States killed 2 million civilians during the Vietnam War. That doesn't include Cambodia, where it's estimated our bombing there to stop the flow of weapons into Vietnam killed as many as 700,000 civilians. Thank you very much, David Kissinger. I'm sorry, that's his son. Who's the father? Henry Kissinger. David Kissinger is the showbiz executive who tries to rehabilitate his war criminal for a father's reputation. 700,000 civilians killed in Cambodia. Henry Kissinger. Laos. What about Laos? Well, after 600,000 bombing missions over Laos between 1964 and 1973, America dropped 2 million tons of bombs on the Laotian people, bombs that are still going off today, bombs that, conservatively speaking, killed 50,000 civilians. So, no, it's not the job of the military to kill people and destroy things because it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It just kills innocent civilians. We lost in Laos. We lost in Cambodia. We lost in Vietnam. We lost in Iraq. And we lost in Afghanistan. It is the job of our military, especially graduates of West Point, to win the hearts and minds of the people we're attempting to liberate. And you don't win wars. The only wars that are ever won are the ones not fought. It is the job of West Point graduates to advise against war. Then, in his speech, Trump told the soldiers to, quote, do what you love. Yes, go out and kill indiscriminately, but do it in a way that you bounce out of bed each morning and can't wait to do it because it's something you love. Do what you love. The man is a sociopath. Trump called January 6th a day of love. I'm starting to believe Donald Trump has no idea what love means. I know that's hard to believe with the loving father he had, but I think he may not know what real love means. Then, and I'm not making this up, Trump warned the West Point cadets not to have trophy wives. Apparently that's the problem with our military. Trophy wives. He said a trophy wife will destroy your momentum. Very sound military advice. A lot of people think Hitler was defeated because the Allies stormed the beaches of Normandy. No. It was the trophy wife he had. Because Hitler had a trophy wife, he had to divert way too many resources away from Normandy and from the Russian front in order to keep Eva Braun satisfied, who, by the way, up until the last week of her life, wasn't technically Hitler's wife. Hitler married Eva Braun in the bunker and then shot himself. I know the feeling. But I don't know anything about trophy wives. Melania, you're a trophy wife. Could you describe your wedding night? What was sex with Donald Trump like?
I don't want to talk about it. Suffice to say it was repulsive and stomach-churning. But let's not discuss it. It was horrible. Imagine, if you will, a boiled cabbage sitting out in the sun for a week, and then a senior citizen with Crohn's disease took a dump on it, and then a dying skunk ate it and pooped it out. That's what it smelled like. But let's not discuss this. Please. It's not to be talked about. We must have secrets. We must. I don't want you to know everything about me. I want there to be mystery. It's part of my allure. So let's just say it smells like a mass grave, but without the bodies buried. They just lay there, baking in the sun, rotting. That's what it smelled like. And let's just leave it at that. Please. I can't tell you about it. I am too ashamed. I am so embarrassed. Please don't ask me. It was too shameful. Try to imagine an egg salad sandwich covered in maggots that has been run over by a garbage truck while an alligator was eating it. Then try to imagine what that would smell like if someone sprinkled garlic, onion, fresh poop, and vomit on top of it. That's exactly what it smelled like. But please, don't make me describe to you what it was like. But that's what it smelled like. Please. I am so ashamed. Don't make me talk about it. There must be secrets.
No.
There must, I say.
No, I should have taken an extra 2 weeks off, obviously. Sorry about that. During his speech, Trump celebrated his crackdown on DEI in the military. Trump hasn't been able to defeat global terrorism, get Russia to pull out of Ukraine or Israel to pull out of Gaza, but he has defeated a much deadlier enemy, diversity, equity, and inclusion. You know, we take it for granted now, but there was a time in America when women, people of color, and members of the LGBTQ community lived under a dark cloud of opportunity and respect. But thanks to Donald Trump, equality for everyone is a thing of the past. Under Pete Hegseth's military leadership, the Pentagon now forbids places like West Point from teaching about America's long history of racism and sexism and persecution of minorities. That's a good thing to do, right, Pete Hegseth?
My butt hurts.
Okay, knock it off. Yes, it does. Thanks to Pete Hegseth, the Pentagon no longer does any recruiting from the Society of... Is anybody still here after that? Thanks to Pete Hegseth's war on DEI, the Pentagon no longer does any recruiting from the Society of Black Engineers or the Latin Cultural Club. Pictures of Jackie Robinson and the Tuskegee Airmen have been stripped off the walls inside the Pentagon. Books that celebrate black veterans have been removed from military libraries around the world. And despite Congress passing a bill 5 years ago forbidding military bases honoring Confederate generals, Pete Hegseth has officially ordered the names of those slave-holding Confederate generals to be restored to those military bases. It's Fort Bragg again, because according to Hegseth, it's part of our history, and we can't ignore it, except when it comes to teaching actual history. Then it should be ignored. We can call it Fort Bragg, but our soldiers can't be taught that Braxton Bragg was a genocidal maniac and a horrible general. That we can't teach. We're told we must not tear down the statues honoring our Confederate soldiers because it's part of our history. But we can't teach our children actual history because actual history is un-American. In Florida, children are being taught that slavery served as a trade school to teach black people valuable skills for when they were finally ready to be released into society. I wish I were lying to you. That's the official policy of Ron DeSantis's Florida State Board of Education. And when you read Jason Stanley or Timothy Snyder, who write extensively about fascism, this is precisely how fascism works. You erase history. You create a mythical past a past that never existed, a mythical past where the dominant group in America, that would be white, straight Christian men, where they never did anything wrong. And they are now being victimized by so-called marginalized groups who want to subjugate them, who want to subjugate white, straight Christian men by blaming them for all our nation's ills. See, there's nothing original here. I did a lot of reading during my 2 weeks. I read Jason Stanley again. I read Timothy Snyder again. I just finished reading Sinclair Lewis's It Can't Happen Here. I really recommend reading Sinclair Lewis's It Can't Happen Here. It was written in 1935, and it could have been written today. Trump is working off a shop-worn playbook. He doesn't have an original bone in his body. Stoking white, straight, Christian male victimhood is the tritest way to seize power. And I think that's what makes him so offensive. It's how stupid and unoriginal he is. And banning Haitians while providing political asylum to white South African farmers by lying about how dangerous it is for the white South African farmers. In the fascist playbook, the lie is part of the power play. White South African farmers are not in danger. Trump knows they're not in danger, and he knows, we know they're not in danger. But his base delights in the fact that the media bothers to fact-check Trump's lie about the South African farmers. We all know it's a lie. Everybody knows it's a lie. Trump, his supporters, it's supposed to be a lie. It's supposed to be hypocritical. Trump is now taking in white South African farmers as refugees to say, I'm a racist. That's the message. Go ahead, he's saying, accuse me of hypocrisy for deporting migrants while bringing in white South African farmers. But for fascists like Donald Trump and his base, they love the hypocrisy. They love the lie. They love that it's really out in the open racism. Trump said to donors last year he only wants immigrants from nice countries. That's what he said. Why can't we get immigrants from nice countries? And by nice, he said countries like Denmark, Switzerland, and Norway. He said that April 5th of last year. He was talking to donors in Palm Beach, Florida. Why can't we get nice immigrants, white immigrants? He's not hiding it anymore. He believes in the Great Replacement theory, which is as old as the protocols of the elders of Zion, the idea that the Jews or the liberals are bringing people of color into the country to poison our nation's white Christian heritage. That's nothing original here. It's really insulting to our stupidity. The Department of Justice, under Pam Bondi, just announced it is ending Biden-era consent decrees with police departments that have a long history of persecuting black people. The Biden Justice Department had these consent decrees to get these police departments in line. Trump comes in, Pam Bondi, our Attorney General, ends the consent decree with the Minneapolis police force. That's where Derek Chauvin, the murderer of George Floyd, he served with the Minneapolis police. And now there's talk Trump is going to pardon Derek Chauvin. Why? Because he's a fascist. And that's what fascists do. They go out of their way to enforce white supremacy, to celebrate a white cop who kills a black person. You make him a hero, a victim. Derek Chauvin becomes the victim, not George Floyd. That's how fascism works. Read Jason Stanley. Read Timothy Snyder. The consent decree with Louisville, Kentucky has been canceled. You might remember the Department of Justice under Joe Biden put Louisville cops under a consent decree after their police department back in 2020 killed Breonna Taylor, a 26-year-old emergency room technician, during a no-knock raid. The Department of Justice last week canceled investigations into the police departments for Phoenix, Memphis, and Oklahoma City. All of those police departments have been accused of targeting people of color. So they cancel those consent decrees. What does the Department of Civil Rights inside the Justice Department start doing? They announced an investigation into the black mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, because he spoke 2 weeks ago at a black church talking about the number of black people he has hired. And according to Pam Bondi, that is racism. It violates the civil rights of white people who are the victims in a fascist regime. The dominant culture is always the victim. Read Jason Stanley about that. Pam Bondi is saying it's racist. It's racist to hire traditionally marginalized groups. So they're going to go after the mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson. In the fascist playbook, it is the dominant culture, white, straight, Christian men who are the victims. It is straight, white, Christian men who are the ones being denied opportunity in the zero-sum game for employment. That's how it works. White people, Christians, are the victims. If you ask Marjorie Taylor Greene, Christians are the most persecuted religion in the world. Well, at least Trump, to his credit, is doing it out in the open. His racism, his appeal to white Christian nationalists, his perpetuation of the great replacement theory, his pinching ideas, lines, and phrases from Mein Kampf and the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, it's all out there for everyone to see. He doesn't attempt to hide it anymore. Pete Hegseth, before running or ruining the Pentagon, said women shouldn't be combat soldiers. He is a white Christian nationalist who believes women belong in the home, helping their husbands and making babies. That's what they believe. They say it. Read his books. We need more babies. That's what he's saying. And you hear this from a lot of white Christian nationalists like J.D. Vance, Pete Hegseth, and of course Speaker Mike Johnson. We need to encourage women to have more babies, but they have to be white babies. There are thousands of children at the border, but these Christian nationalists don't want those babies. They want white babies, white Christian babies. Well, fascists control women's bodies. And unfortunately for Donald Trump, West Point's valedictorian this year was Joanna K. Halfhill, who, unfortunately for Pete Hegseth, is a woman. She's one of 252 female graduates from West Point this year. It is now the 45th anniversary of West Point accepting females. And if you ask Pete Hegseth, that's when it all went to crap, letting women in. During his speech, Trump told the cadets that what is that? See, this is what happens. That is, that's an actual photo of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance having lunch together and then going under the sprinkler at the White House. They have a little play date together. During his speech, is anybody here? During his speech, Trump told the cadets that transgender athletes are, quote, demeaning to women. That's what he told the West Point graduates, that transgender athletes are demeaning to women, because that's the most pressing danger our military faces. That's why he brought it up at West Point. We really have to worry about that one transgender athlete competing in high school sports. It's not an issue. It's not an issue. The new head of the NCAA is Charlie Baker. I believe he was once the governor of Massachusetts, I think. Well, he was asked earlier this year about our imaginary problem that the Republicans created, this fake problem, these fake enemies, and that would be men competing in women's sports. Charlie Baker, head of the NCAA, said there are 500,000 college athletes. Of them, he said there are fewer than 10 who he knows of as being transgender athletes. He said, I say 10, but that's the high end. He said it's much lower than that. This is the thing about transgender athletes competing in high school or college sports. Nobody can name any. Nobody can name any. Certainly not in high school sports. Now, there's Leah Thomas. She's a transgender athlete who swam for the University of Pennsylvania a few years ago. I will say, because I'm going to talk about ice in a second, I will say this. There are probably a handful of transgender college athletes. I will give you that. Charlie Baker, as I just said, the head of the NCAA, says it's fewer than 10. A handful. But from that, we can build an entire narrative that Kamala Harris lost because she didn't speak out against them. She didn't criticize the 5 transgender athletes competing in women's sports, and that's why she lost. As if that's the most important issue facing our country. But when you're a fascist, you create the most pressing issues facing our country. You invent the most pressing issues. You create imaginary enemies, because when you have imaginary enemies, you can mold the narrative. And most importantly, since we're talking about West Point, it's always easiest to defeat an enemy that doesn't actually exist. Trump can't defeat Putin, wouldn't even think of standing up to Putin. Defeat imaginary enemies. Okay. So, I will give you that there are about 5 transgender athletes competing in college sports. That I'll give you. But I've asked my listeners to provide evidence of gang members from MS-13 or Tren de Aragua who ever put up some sort of fight while getting arrested by ICE. I've scoured the internet. I've made phone calls. I've crowdsourced. I've asked my listeners for one single episode where a gang member from MS-13 or Tren de Aragua threw a punch, fired a shot, waved a knife at an ICE agent while they were being arrested. Doesn't exist. Can't find one instance. And yet, Donald Trump insists we're at war with Venezuela. He literally declared war on Venezuela, claiming Nicolas Maduro, the head of Venezuela, sent marauding members of Tren de Aragua into our country to murder, to rape, to kidnap. He calls these guys the worst of the worst. And yet, not one single shot, not one single punch. Doesn't sound like a war to me. But when you're a fascist like Donald Trump, you want imaginary enemies, because imaginary enemies are the easiest to defeat. The Houthis. We were bombing the Houthis. And next thing you know, we won. During his speech at West Point, Trump said he's gotten rid of DEI and created a merit-based merit-based military. He said it's all about the meritocracy. Only the best rise to the top in Trump world. Just so happens in Trump world, only the best are straight, white, Christian, and often closeted males. Only the best. It's a meritocracy. You know, like our Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, got that job through the meritocracy. Totally, it was all about merit. Pete Hegseth, fired from the nonprofit veterans group he ran, or asked to leave because of gross financial mismanagement. By the time Pete Hegseth was asked to resign as president of Veterans for Freedom, that was the nonprofit he ran into the ground, he had $434,000 in unpaid bills and $75,000 in credit card debt. That's what he racked up. That's what the nonprofit racked up under his leadership. So who better to run the Pentagon than Pete Hegseth? They can't audit the Pentagon, can't audit Pete Hegseth, put him in charge. While running the organization, there were countless accusations of sexual harassment against him, while at the same time an internal report accused Pete Hegseth of creating a work climate that turned a blind eye to sexual assault. Pete Hegseth turning a blind eye to sexual assault? You mean the same Pete Hegseth who paid a woman $75,000 not to go public with her rape accusations? That Pete Hegseth? Is that the Pete Hegseth we're talking about? The same Pete Hegseth whose own mother put into writing he's a serial abuser of women? That Pete Hegseth? Who better to run our entire military than a guy who rose to fame by making crap up on Fox News? A total incompetent who shares classified war plans on two separate group signal chats. One of those was with his lawyer, his personal lawyer, his wife, and two brothers. Yes, Pete Hegseth getting hired to run the Pentagon, totally merit-based. There was nobody out there abusive enough towards women. Nobody else out there with as many neo-Nazi tattoos. Nobody else out there drunk enough, arrogant, and stupid enough to run our Pentagon. It was totally merit-based. You know, if Pete Hegseth weren't white, he'd be in prison just for being as drunk in public as he was. He'd have spent time in prison. Forget the rape accusations. Forget the sexual harassment accusations. Forget the financial mismanagement of his nonprofit. Just his behavior as a drunk. The police would have found a reason to lock him up if he were a person of color. Instead, he allegedly got drunk in uniform and jumped up on the stage at strip clubs, allegedly led his co-workers in a late-night drunken chat of kill all Muslims, never got arrested. Totally merit-based. Totally merit-based. It's a meritocracy. Just like Lara Trump, the idiot wife of Trump's idiot son, Eric. She was named co-chairwoman of the Republican National Committee last year based solely on merit. And she just got her new show, My View with Lara Trump on Fox News. Why? Merit. Who cares that the lead-in show has double the ratings? Who cares that according to the latest Nielsen's, half the Fox News audience stops watching when she comes on? It's merit. This is a meritocracy, like Jared and Ivanka getting jobs in the first Trump White House. Merit. Jared's new firm is called Affinity Partners, and they were given $3 billion to invest by Saudi Arabia and several other oil-rich countries. Why? Merit. Who cares that last year the Senate Finance Committee discovered Jared collected $157 million in management fees since 2021 while providing zero return for his investors from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. Who cares? Sure, they could have gotten a 5% annual return putting those billions into a money market fund or a CD. Instead, Saudi Arabia, which gave Jared $2 billion to invest, Qatar, which gave him $1.5 billion to invest, the UAE, which gave him several $100 million to invest, they are perfectly content getting absolutely no return on their investment while Jared Kushner takes $157 million in management fees. He deserves those management fees. He's got to be paid $157 million to take in billions of dollars and not invest it. It's a meritocracy. It's all about merit. Like Charles Kushner, Jared's father, becoming not just America's new ambassador to France, but also our ambassador to Monaco. Charles Kushner, Jared's father, a convicted felon who hired a prostitute to videotape herself having sex with Charles Kushner's brother-in-law, so Charles Kushner could send that tape to his sister to punish his brother-in-law for cooperating with New Jersey prosecutors who were charging him with tax evasion, violating campaign finance laws, and because of that tape, witness tampering. Convicted felon, went to prison, pardoned by Donald Trump because it's a meritocracy. Charles Kushner, convicted felon, father of Jared Kushner, our new ambassador to France and Monaco, merit. This isn't affirmative action. This isn't DEI. It's a meritocracy. The same way Jared Kushner got into Harvard. Merit. And that merit was the $2.5 million Charles Kushner, his daddy, donated to Harvard while Jared was applying to the merit-based college called Harvard. Merit. Daniel Golden writes in his book, The Price of Admission, that the people in charge of Jared's private high school in New Jersey were shocked, dumbfounded, that Jared Kushner, given his test scores, GPA, slothfulness, and let's be generous and call him stupid, they were shocked that he got accepted into Harvard. Well, don't you know anything about merit? It's a meritocracy. Your father donates $2.5 million to Harvard while Jared is applying to the college. That's a meritocracy, not DEI, not affirmative action. The best person, the one most qualified, succeeds in Trump world, like Sarah Huckabee. Sanders getting the job as Trump's press secretary and then getting elected governor of Arkansas, the same job her father had. It was merit. I love this picture of Sarah Huckabee. She's such a happy Christian warrior, isn't she? This is what she, I do have the sound. That's what it sounds like. That's what, remember she used to do that? Remember during the press conferences, she would just, when she didn't want to answer a question, she would just belch. Merit. And of course, Don Jr. He is the poster child for meritocracy, the eldest son of Donald Trump Sr. In the past year, Don Jr.'s landed all these exciting deals, all based on merit. The Wall Street Journal says Don Jr., just in the past year, has become an executive with a company that makes drones, another company that makes handguns, another company called Grab a Gun. I think they're in the weapons business as well. Don Jr. has also become an investor in Kalshi, an online betting firm. This is all in the past year. He's a big investor now in Salem, which owns a chain of right-wing radio stations around the United States. He's got his own cryptocurrency. Yeah, Don Jr. in the past year up to his neck in merit. And don't forget, right after his father was reelected, Don Jr. was hired by the venture capital firm 1789 Capital, which invests in anti-woke businesses like the Enhanced Games or the Steroid Olympics. This is a real thing where athletes are going to be allowed to do whatever they want to their bodies, including gene editing, to win. The Steroid Olympics. This is what Don Jr. is investing in. But transgender athletes getting hormone treatment so they don't commit suicide, that we have to get rid of. But the Steroid Olympics, a year from now, in May of next year at Resorts World, Las Vegas. What a great investor Don Jr. is. Like his brother, Eric Trump, in the past year, for some reason, all in the past year, this genius, Eric Trump, no DEI, no affirmative action for Eric Trump. In the past year, he's launching Trump Tower Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. There's an apartment complex and then a separate golf resort in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. There's going to be a $500 million golf course in Oman. There's going to be Trump Tower in the UAE, all in the past year that Eric Trump has pulled this off, plus several billion-dollar real estate deals in India, all in the past year. Wall Street Journal, big story about the merit that Eric Trump has displayed. Brilliant businessman, Eric Trump. His new cryptocurrency, launched by World Liberty Financial, also merit. It's all merit. The fact that Zach Witkoff runs World Liberty Financial, that's the ones who are launching this cryptocurrency, makes it even more merit-based. Zach, that's him on the left, and his brother Alex Witkoff, of course, are the sons of Stephen Witkoff, the real estate attorney, now serving as Trump's peace envoy in Iran, Ukraine, and the Middle East. Also very much merit-based hiring, putting Steve Witkoff in charge of negotiating with Iran, Ukraine, and Hamas. That's why it's going so well. Who is more qualified to negotiate peace with Hamas, Putin, and the Ayatollah than a New York real estate attorney whose only previous experience in government was lending Donald Trump a private jet last year when Trump's was out of commission? Put him in charge of negotiating peace. Only the best. Purely merit-based. No affirmative action. No DEI. No nepotism. These are just ubermenches rising to the top, like Howard Lutnick, our new Secretary of Commerce, who left the investment firm Cantor Fitzgerald to serve in Washington, and he handed the job of CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald over to his son, Brandon Lutnick. While the executive vice chairman of Cantor Fitzgerald, working under Brandon Lutnick, is Kyle Lutnick. Merit-based. Howard Lutnick, who runs Cantor Fitzgerald, looked around. Where can I find the most qualified child of mine to replace me? Merit-based. That's a meritocracy. So this is an interesting story here. You got your Brandon Lutnick. He's in charge. And then his brother, Kyle Lutnick, is working beneath him. But here's where it gets interesting. And this is why I really respect Howard Lutnick. Kyle is older than Brandon, but Howard Lutnick put the younger son, Brandon, in charge of the older son. No primogeniture, no, merit-based. It's all merit-based. If the younger son is more qualified than the older son, he gets the job. No DEI, no affirmative action for these Nepo fetuses. They're not even Nepo babies. They're Nepo fetuses. Well, during his speech at West Point, Trump promised the cadets his Golden Dome missile defense shield will be finished before he leaves office, which means never. He's never leaving office, and his Golden Dome missile defense shield is never going to be finished. The Golden Dome is expected to cost $175 billion. Sure, that's all. Yeah. And it will prevent anyone from being able to attack us, just like France's Maginot Line that kept the Nazis out. The Golden Dome is included in the new 2026 budget. Let's talk about One Big Beautiful Bill, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which goes before the Senate today. Seriously, its official name is the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. They figured Lindsey Graham couldn't resist saying yes to One Big Beautiful Bill. I think he knows a couple. Lindsey doesn't care what's inside One Big Beautiful Bill. It's 1,000 pages long, and it's exactly what Mike Johnson promised he wouldn't do. He promised not to bundle 12 appropriations bills into one big, beautiful 1,000-page bill, which nobody ever read. By the way, I should mention this because, see that? That is Mike Rogers, who, along with his amazing hair, represents Alabama's 3rd congressional district. I love Mike Rogers. I mean, what an amazing head of hair on this guy. How does a man that age have such a thick, luxuriant head of hair? I wish I knew his secret. God, he's handsome. Mike Rogers. Remember he tried to punch Matt Gaetz? Mike Rogers, such great hair. Well, originally, Donald Trump didn't want the budget bill to be called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Originally, he wanted it to be called the Mike Rogers Toupee Act of 2025. Why would Donald Trump want to call it the Mike Rogers Toupee Act of 2025? What does that even mean? Well, as you know, One Big Beautiful Bill passed the House Thursday by a 215 to 214 margin. One vote would have killed it. Ties are not broken by the vice president in the House of Representatives. So one vote would have killed it. 3 House Democrats died this year and have not been replaced. Sylvester Turner of Texas died March 4th of this year at the age of 70. Raul Grijalva of Arizona died March 13th of this year at the age of 77. And Jerry Connolly of Virginia died last week at the age of 75. Had one of them, all it took was one of them not to die, and the budget bill would have died instead. But a win is a win, and Mike Johnson, well, he gets the win. And I told you that I thought Speaker Mike Johnson would survive a lot longer than everyone thought he would. He's, if you're a fascist, you should be very pleased with Mike Johnson. He's demonstrating he knows how to count votes. He knows how to herd cats. Herding cats, as they often describe getting your caucus to stay in line. So how is Mike Johnson able to do it? Many attribute Johnson's success to his reliance on team spirit. Here we see him taking a page from the Jennifer Hudson show, where before each member of the Republican caucus enters the chamber to cast a ballot, they must first walk through a spirit tunnel. I believe this is Chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Jim Jordan, about to cast his vote in favor of one big, beautiful bill. That is Mike Johnson's spirit tunnel. Apparently, Jim Jordan's fancy moves are not just reserved for college wrestlers in the shower room. And yes, I was playing with artificial intelligence during my 2 weeks off. That is artificial intelligence. I took Photoshop. I put the head on Jim Jordan, and then I fed it into one of these new. Anyway, this is going to get us all killed. By the way, we're doomed. This is in about 3 weeks. The robots are going to kill us. So it won't be climate change. It will be the robots. That's the good news. So what's in one big, beautiful bill? Well, big, beautiful bill lifts the debt ceiling by an additional $4 trillion. They're going to lift the debt ceiling by an additional $4 trillion. Our national debt currently sits at $36.8 trillion. That's good old-fashioned Photoshop. That's not artificial intelligence. That's just good old-fashioned, the old-fashioned way. But Republicans continue to insist they are the party of fiscal responsibility. When Biden needed to lift the debt ceiling in 2023, Republicans said he was spending money like a drunken sailor, which is true because sailors don't usually have a lot of money to spend. But when it's time to rack up the debt by giving tax cuts to the rich, well, Republicans say debt is okay. Debt is okay. We need debt, they say, to stimulate the economy. When Democrats are in charge, debt is inflationary. But when Republicans want to concentrate wealth into fewer and fewer hands by cutting taxes for the richest of the rich, debt is how you create jobs. So big, beautiful, well-hung bill, I think that's what it's called. Is that what they're calling it? Big, beautiful, well-hung bill? It passed the House last week, and he can pass in the Senate without any Democrats. According to parliamentary rules, in the Senate, budgets are filibuster-proof, which means, unlike most bills in the Senate, you just need a simple majority. And who's more simple than the Republicans? It's part of what is called the reconciliation process. So Republicans right now have 53 seats in the Senate, plus you've got the vice president to break any ties. Democrats have 45 seats plus 2 independents, Bernie Sanders and Angus King. They caucus with the Democrats, so that brings it up to 47. 53 Republicans, 47 Democrats. It takes, therefore, do the math, 4 Republicans to kill the budget bill. 4 Republicans. In other words, I think it's going to pass. Right now, you can find, 10 Republican senators who say they don't like this bill. The same way you could find 10 Republican senators who said they had concerns about Pete Hegseth. But in the end, with Trump, they fall in line because Trump knows how to whip votes with an actual whip. He cajoles, and if that doesn't work, there are the death threats. I don't need to be polite here, but remember, because the media doesn't talk enough about the death threats. This is the guy who pardoned and or commuted the sentences for 1,400 violent sociopaths who stormed the Capitol on January 6. He just ordered his Justice Department to pay the family of Ashley Babbitt $6 million. Enrique Tarrio, the chairman of the Proud Boys, had dinner at Mar-a-Lago this month, talked with Trump. Trump said, "I love you guys." Why is this happening? Because the organizing principle of the Trump administration, first and foremost, violence. See, this is an underreported story because most Republican lawmakers won't discuss the death threats. They've been advised not to. They have been told that when you go public with the death threats, it only leaves you open to more death threats. They've been told, ignore the death threats. The most underreported story in Washington right now is the threat of violence that all Republican lawmakers and their families are living under because of Donald Trump. So, you have senators like Rand Paul, Ron Johnson, Rick Scott, Republicans right now making noises about how they object to raising the debt ceiling. But in the end, they're going to fall in line. Maybe Rand Paul will vote against this budget bill. But Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, Rick Medicare Fraud Scott of Florida, they will fall in line. Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who has said openly she's terrified of Donald Trump. She said, we all are. Susan Collins of Maine, Tom Tillis of North Carolina, not a courageous bone in their bodies. None of them will vote down this budget. So I'm usually wrong, but sometimes I'm not. I hate to say it, but right now I believe this budget is going to pass. And Democrats are privately saying this is a good thing because it's something we can run on in the midterms. They're saying the Republicans are, they're showing their hands, and the American people are going to wake up and see what they're really like. I don't know. I'm going to hold off on criticizing the Democrats. I got some stuff. I want to talk about David Hogg, and I've been off for 2 weeks. I'm not going to criticize the Democrats. I don't know the path forward. I do know Republicans are fascists. And I read Sinclair Lewis's It Can't Happen Here. It was written in 1935. Nothing's changed. Republicans are fascists, always have been. Democrats are liberals. They're not leftists. And there's a difference between leftists and liberals. Bernie, AOC, me, I'm a leftist. But Democrats are liberals, going all the way back to Roosevelt. The real struggle within the Democratic Party is between the liberals, the old school Roosevelt liberals, the Adlai Stevenson, Eleanor Roosevelt liberals, and the neo-liberals. Leftists, the progressives in the Democratic Party, there's no infrastructure for them. Despite all the enthusiasm we see when Bernie and AOC hit the road, we don't have an infrastructure in place yet for the leftists. So I don't know how you defeat fascists at the polls. I don't know. But we are up against fascism. This has happened in other countries. It's happening here. It's never been like this before. We came close with Lindbergh in the lead up to World War II, but that's where we're at. The Republican Party is the party of fascists. I don't know if the Democratic Party in its current state has the vocabulary to take on fascists. Roosevelt did. He was a liberal, not a leftist. not a leftist. Well, Big Beautiful Bill, who is strong, well-hung, but gentle like a spring shower, he would... Wait a second. We're talking about the the budget bill. Sorry, got carried away there. Big Beautiful Bill. What is it? Big Beautiful Bill. It would extend Trump's 2017 tax cuts. They're supposed to expire at the end of this year. So Trump's tax cuts for the rich back in 2017 ended up adding trillions to the debt. By the time Trump left office, he had added $8 trillion to our national debt. Nearly 1/3 of our entire debt was racked up by the king of debt, Donald Trump. The tax cuts for the rich in 2017 didn't balance the budget as he promised, because tax cuts for the rich never balance budgets. They create more debt. And all the cuts for the rich did in 2017 is produce a little sugar high in 2018, where the economy grew a little bit faster for 1 quarter and then settled back down to grow at the pace it had been growing under the Obama administration. And then 2 years later, the worst recession since the Great Depression. The Congressional Budget Office, which is the referee, it's fact-based, it's apolitical, now estimating that extending the Trump tax cuts will balloon our debt by $4 trillion over the next decade. But Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says adding to the debt is perfectly fine because I'm worth several $100 million. Well, he said it's perfectly okay. I don't think he mentioned the several $100 million. Bessent, our Treasury Secretary, making the rounds, the morning talk shows, spreading the lie that Reagan told, the lie that Arthur Laffer told, the lie that George W. Bush and Trump in 2017 told, the lie that Paul Ryan still tells. And that lie is tax cuts for the rich, juice the economy, and thereby minimize our nation's debt to GDP ratio. That's how the lie has evolved since Reagan. They used to just say tax cuts for the rich will create so many high-paying jobs that our IRS will be flooded with billions of dollars in new taxes from these new high-paying jobs. Reagan, Bush, and Trump in 2017, they ended up proving that to be the lie it is. It just balloons the debt. Tax cuts for the rich do not create jobs. Fact. And since we're on to them, Republicans are evolving. They're molding the lie. They're saying debt now should be measured against our nation's GDP. And then your eyes glaze over and you don't understand it. You're not expected to. And then you just decide, well, I'm afraid of transgender people, so I'm voting for Trump. They say, this is how the lie has evolved. They say if our GDP is $30 trillion, that means if our economy produces $30 trillion in goods and services each year, and our debt is $34 trillion, Republicans say that's bad, because that's where things stand right now. Our economy is about $30 trillion. Our debt is $34 trillion. The new lie is, this is what they say, if we cut taxes for the rich, we can grow the economy to $40 trillion a year, and the debt will only be $38 trillion. That's what they're saying. Scott Bessent, nobody believes this. It's what they're selling. You will say anything to keep your money. Oh, and by the way, Scott Bessent also warned yesterday the United States government runs out of money in August. We're all out of money in August. Unless we raise the debt ceiling, by August, the government defaults on its debt can't pay its bills. Interesting, because I thought Elon Musk was doing such a great job finding all those savings. So, kind of surprised. I thought Doja was going to save us trillions on auto insurance. So, how do you pretend to pay for these tax cuts? Well, first thing is you pretend you're going to pay for them. You raise the debt ceiling, and then you cut benefits for the most vulnerable while calling yourself the party of Jesus. That's how it works. By the way, I checked again. Nothing in the Sermon on the Mount about the meek getting meeker so a camel can pass through the eye of a needle. Something like that. There's nothing about taking from the meek to make the rich richer. Nothing in the Sermon on the Mount. Yet the people pushing this garbage call themselves the party of Christ. And these cuts in this bill, they do nothing to put a dent in the deficit. Now we're hearing Senate Republicans complaining the bill doesn't cut spending enough. That's what they're complaining about. Not the tax cuts for the rich. Those we need. We need to cut the problem is we need to cut spending. But can't touch Medicaid or Medicare. But if you're going to touch it, make sure Trump is out there lying, saying he never touched it, the same way he insists he never touched any of the 50 women with credible sexual assault allegations against him. So, the current bill, the budget that passed in the House, cuts $1 trillion from Medicare and food stamps over the next decade. It is estimated, get out your pad and pencil. We're going to do some, anybody still here? I wait until the end of the show to talk about drier stuff. We're going to do some adding and subtracting. So, the current bill that passed in the House cuts $1 trillion from Medicare. I'm sorry, Medicaid. Did I say Medicare? Medicaid. They're not touching Medicare. Medicaid cuts $1 trillion from Medicaid and food stamps over the next decade. It is estimated, keep this in mind, $1 trillion over the next 10 years. It is estimated that had Biden been reelected, or Kamala Harris, if the government wasn't about to fire 45,000 IRS employees, we would collect roughly $500 billion a year in unpaid taxes. Leaving the Trump, even if you renewed the Trump tax cuts, by keeping the 45,000 IRS employees that Trump and Musk are firing, the IRS would be able to collect $500 billion that gets uncollected each year because the IRS lacks the personnel. It's estimated that the tax gap is $1 trillion a year. The gap between what people owe and what they pay. $1 trillion is left on the table because the IRS doesn't have enough personnel to go after rich people and make them pay what they owe, the job creators. So as you all know, Biden attempted to fix that in the Inflation Reduction Act by hiring tens of thousands of new IRS employees. Had Biden been reelected or Kamala been reelected, there'd be $500 billion a year extra for 2026. And then, had Biden or Kamala been reelected, the Trump tax cuts for the rich would expire at the end of this year. That brings in another $500 billion. The tax cuts for the rich cost us $500 billion a year. So all we had to do was reelect Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, and we would automatically have $1 trillion in extra revenue for 2026. In 1 year. 1 year. That's $10 trillion over 10 years. The Republicans are cutting $1 trillion from Medicaid and food stamps over a 10-year period. Instead of cutting Medicaid and food stamps by $1 trillion, we could add $10 trillion to Medicaid and food stamps, or dare I say, Medicaid for all, Medicare for all, food, free lunch, breakfast, at dinner, inside every public school, 365 days a year. Healthcare and food are a human right. So, not going to happen. Trump and the Republicans won. So, instead, the budget bill passed in the House, now before the Senate, has a $700 billion cut in Medicaid spending over the next decade. Food stamps, or SNAP, is going to be cut by $267 billion over the next decade. Do me a favor, write these numbers down, because I know it's a lot of money. It's hard to, but working with these, it's just addition. It's not it's not calculus. It's not even division. I'm not even asking for percentages here. If the Democrats would teach voters how budgeting works and what these numbers are, we'd be storming the Capitol on January 6th. We wouldn't be, but you'd be. If we understood the numbers, the Republicans wouldn't get away with this. So they're going to cut food stamps by $267 billion over the next decade. Right? Letting the Trump tax cuts expire this year and not firing IRS employees would add $1 trillion a year in revenue. A year. They're going to cut $267 billion over the next decade. That's $26 billion a year. See what kind of money we're talking about just by hiring more IRS agents and letting the Trump tax cuts expire? Right now, according to the Republican bill, 42 million Americans receive food stamps, and the Republicans believe they're gaming the system. Why are 42 million Americans needing food stamps? The minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, the federal minimum wage. That's not most states, it's higher. So in most states, or not most, but let's say it's $15 an hour. But let's do the math here. I want you to get a pencil and just write these numbers down. I want to show you how cruel and unchristian Mike Johnson and the Republicans are. Okay? Let's say, so 42 million Americans require food stamps. Let's say you're paid $15 an hour. That's $600 a week. What if you have a child or an ailing loved one or a sick child? What if you're a caretaker? Is $600 a week enough? That's $15 an hour. Think about your own life. Is $600 a week enough? That's $15 an hour. The minimum wage is half that. Minimum wage is $300 a week. But let's pause here and do the math, because money like sex and like food, are the three things Americans refuse to talk about. There's much shame associated with food, sex, and money. So let's talk about money. Please, let's talk about money. $15 an hour, that's $600 a week. You work 40 hours a week. That's $28,800 a year. $28,800 a year if you get $15 an hour. According to our federal government, $28,000 a year is way above the poverty line. According to our federal government, if you're single, $15,000 a year or less for a single person is considered living below the poverty line. Well, guess what? $15,000 a year is exactly what our minimum wage comes to. It's exactly what the minimum wage adds up to. If you're paid $7.25 an hour and you work 40 hours a week, that's $15,000 a year. You're living in poverty. If you're paid double that, $15 an hour, in some states, you're still living in poverty, but you're definitely the working poor, especially if you have 3 other mouths to feed. If you have, according to the federal government, $30,000 or $28,000 a year, if you have 3 other mouths to feed, is poverty. So you're making $15 an hour. You have a parent who lives with you, maybe a nephew who needs help. I mean, families are not what Mike Johnson wants us to believe they are. Families are a construct. We take in people not because they're blood, but because we love them or we're being responsible. The idea of the Leave It to Beaver family is bullshit. Most people live with people who need to be living with you, either because of whatever. I don't want to talk about it. Okay. Food stamps. This is who the Republicans are attacking. People on food stamps. The average food stamp recipient gets $210 per month. Per mouth. $210 a month. Write that down. Can you feed yourself on $7 a day? Try it. How do you do it? Rice and beans. I mean, it would be the healthiest thing. Not really. It wouldn't be the healthiest thing, especially for kids. $7 a day. The new bill increases work requirements to qualify for food stamps. Okay. This is where it's cruelty and corruption. Most people who receive food stamps are children, senior citizens, or people with disabilities. The rest are already working and can't make ends meet because they have children, aging parents, or a loved one with a physical or mental disability. So with all that's going on in the world, with our $30 trillion economy, you're going to worry about $210 a month? You're going to worry that maybe a handful of people are gaming the system, just taking advantage of the federal government? They have enough money, but they're collecting food stamps anyway. That's what you're going to focus on. That's your priority. imaginary enemies. You can't go after the hedge fund managers. You can't go after the rich Jeff Bezos who doesn't pay his taxes. That's Vladimir Putin. Can't stand up to the real bullies. So you pick on the people who need $210 a month in food stamps. That's how the party of Christ, the Republicans, operate. And by the way, this doesn't make a dent in the budget. We're talking about pennies here. But it's never about. This is not about paying off our debt. This is about punishing people, establishing hierarchy, reminding poor people that they're poor, keeping them scared. So they want to do work requirements for food stamps. This is the height of immorality. It's been tried. States are the laboratories of democracy. They've tried work requirements. I've talked about this. They tried work requirements for food stamps in Iowa. And you know what they discovered? They discovered what you already figured out, that the administrative costs to determine whether or not someone has met the work requirement and is eligible for food stamps, the administrative costs are more expensive than simply trusting the American people who say they need food stamps, because it's $210 a month. Work requirements require more work. It makes government bigger, not smaller. You got to hire more people to find out if you're working, if you deserve food stamps or not. It's cheaper to just let people who are hungry collect food stamps. Indiana tried work requirements. They got rid of work requirements. It didn't work. In Georgia right now, they have work requirements for food stamps. And they're succeeding in getting a lot of poor people off food stamps. That they're succeeding in. But it costs more money in Georgia to deny people food stamps than it does to just feed these people. Every state that has tried work requirements, by the way, discovered doesn't result in more poor people going to work. So, why would a state government do this? Supposedly you're for smaller government, less spending. Why do this? Well, it's cruel. It's sadistic. It maintains the hierarchy. It reminds poor people. It convinces them to be frightened and shameful. But you know who benefits from work requirements for food stamps and Medicaid? ProPublica has written extensively about this. The donors. Companies like Maximus, Deloitte, Accenture, Conduit, Automated Health Systems, they get hired by the state to administer work requirements for food stamps and Medicaid. So the cost of Medicaid and food stamps doesn't go down. The number of people on food stamps or on Medicaid goes down, while the money gets transferred to companies like Maximus, Deloitte, Accenture, Conduit, Automated Health Systems, because they can do it better than the government can, right? That's what the lie, that if we privatize food stamps, it'll be more efficient. Able-bodied Americans between the ages of 18 and 64, according to the Republican bill, must find work to qualify for food stamps. So, who's going to determine whether these people are able-bodied? Maximus, Deloitte, Accenture, Conduent, Automated Health Systems? They will be paid millions to determine how able your body is and whether or not you deserve food or Medicaid. Even parents with children over the age of 7 will be forced to work in order to qualify for food stamps. Think about that. Food! Party of Christ! Party of Christ. Your table is ready. Single mom, single dad, married couple with 1 child, 2 children over the age of 7, they have to work to qualify for food stamps. What happened, Party of Christ, about women staying home to raise a family? What happened to don't get the abortion, we'll help you? We're talking about food, which is a human right. Wealthiest country in the history of civilization, nobody should go to bed hungry. Nobody should be hungry in America. The Congressional Budget Office says the Republicans, Party of Jesus, they've passed a bill in the House that throws 3 million Americans off food stamps. The bill also calls for Medicaid work requirements. And who benefits from Medicaid work requirements? Maximus, Deloitte, Accenture, Conduent, Automated Health Systems. In order to qualify for Medicaid, if you're an adult without any disabilities, you must work 40 hours a month. Or what? Or what? Nobody has answered that question, and it's the only question that should be asked of these Republicans. Or what? What if they don't work? What if they can't find a job? What if the job they find is soul-crushing and they don't want to do it? What if they're lazy? Then what? Then what? That is the only question Jake Tapper should be asking Mike Johnson and every so-called Christian in the Republican Party who's pushing for work requirements, Medicaid and food stamp work requirements. Or what? What if they're just plain lazy? Then what? Ask yourself that question. Somebody doesn't want to work. Why? They're lazy. They drink. They want to watch television. What should happen to them? Should they get food stamps? Should they get Medicaid? Now, I know how I would answer that question. Healthcare and food are a human right, even if you're lazy. That's the question to be asked about these work requirements. Then what? What happens if they don't work? This question is never asked. It was asked 13 years ago, back in 2012. I never forgot this. Most of you, my older listeners, remember this. I know they do. CNN hosted a Republican presidential debate in Tampa, Florida. It was the 2012 presidential election. You had Romney, Michelle Bachmann, remember her? Herman Cain, Newt Gingrich, several other candidates were running for the nomination, and Obamacare had just become law. All these Republican candidates obviously opposed it. Rand Paul is a doctor. His father, Ron Paul, also a doctor, Texas congressman at the time, was running for president. Doctor, libertarian. And Wolf Blitzer from CNN asked during the debate, He asked Dr. Ron Paul if an uninsured, able-bodied man, so they're attacking Obamacare, if an uninsured, able-bodied man who requires a hospital stay, if he's uninsured, Wolf Blitzer asked Ron Paul, should he be left to die? That's the only question that should ever be asked when it comes to Medicaid, Medicare, food stamps. Should he be left to die? And someone from the audience shouted yes. And the audience began to laugh, and some people applauded. And it became very uncomfortable for the Republicans because it was the question you're not supposed to ask them. You're not supposed to ask them the question that has to be asked. But Dr. Ron Paul had to answer. And he said, no, he shouldn't be left to die. Well, what should he do? If he doesn't have health insurance, how does he pay for his hospital stay? Dr. Paul said, well, there are charities. There's the community that will take care of his health care. It shouldn't be the government. It should be the community. Well, that's what the hospitals used to be, right? They used to be charity hospitals, but those days are over. And then he quickly pivoted, talked about personal responsibility and freedom. Freedom means if you take a risk like not getting health insurance, you have to pay a price. That's what freedom is. Really? Well, what if you have a pre-existing condition and the insurance companies wouldn't cover you? I mean, before Obamacare, you weren't purposely not getting health insurance. They wouldn't cover you. He wasn't asked that question. And then Dr. Ron Paul said, quote, I practiced medicine before we had Medicaid in the early 1960s when I got out of medical school. I never saw one person turned away from a hospital, unquote. This is what fascists do. They create this mythical past that never existed, that before we had Medicaid, hospitals had enough money to take anybody in. The mythical past that never existed. Medgar Evers, the civil rights activist, was shot to death in 1963 in Mississippi. As he was dying, Medgar Evers was rushed to the University of Mississippi Medical Center in Jackson, Mississippi, where he was refused treatment because it was a whites-only hospital. As he lay dying on the stretcher, bleeding out, the hospital said, here are some black hospitals that will take him. And then they were told it was civil rights leader Medgar Evers. They became embarrassed, and they caved in, and they admitted him. But it was too late. He died an hour after he was finally admitted into the hospital. Many people say had he been taken to a hospital that accepts black people immediately, his life could have been saved. But Ron Paul said he never once saw anyone denied treatment inside a hospital. That glorious, mythical past that fascists posing as libertarians always talk about. Healthcare is a human right. Speaker Mike Johnson, who, big on Jesus, yesterday he called work requirements for Medicaid the bill's moral component. He said, work requirements for Medicaid and food stamps are what give this budget bill a quote-unquote moral component. This is the man who says he talks to Jesus every day. He says making people work for food stamps and health care is the moral thing to do. Who would Jesus let die? That's the question I would ask of Mike Johnson. Who would Jesus let die? Mike Johnson says work requirements will put an end to Americans defrauding the government. How about you hire more IRS agents to collect the $1 trillion a year your rich Republican donors refuse to pay in taxes? Where's the moral component to that? No, go after the people who need $200 a month in food stamps. Joe Biden lifted more children out of poverty by expanding the child tax credit back in 2021. When Republicans refused to renew that expansion, child poverty shot back up. Both Senator Josh Hawley, Republican from Missouri, and Speaker Mike Johnson last year expressed interest in once again expanding the child tax credit. They said, there's no question, it worked. They expressed interest in expanding it. The bill that passed last week in the House means 2 million children no longer qualify for the child tax credit. If this bill passes, instead of expanding the child tax credit, 2 million children will be denied the child tax credit. The budget bill eliminates $380 billion in student loans over the next decade. It also removes Joe Biden's student loan repayment plans. But let's talk about whether or not he was, what is it, compos mentis? Is that the term? I'll take a senile Joe Biden over any of these MFers. I'm telling you, I don't know the way forward. But if Biden got to serve another 4 years, or Kamala Harris, if Hillary won in 2016, these are not leftists. These are hawks. These are war. I mean, they love war. They're neoliberals, far from perfect, problematic, dangerous. But I am telling you, elections have consequences. Food, college, healthcare, housing wouldn't be free if Hillary won and Biden or Kamala were president now. But I can assure you it would be a lot better than this. A lot better. Of course, the budget, Republican budget, increases Pentagon spending by $150 billion for 2026 alone. $150 billion increase on Pentagon spending for 2026. That means we're going to be spending more than $1 trillion a year on defense that we know of because we can't audit the Pentagon. The bill spends over the next decade $150 billion on border security. What does that mean? It means billions and billions of dollars going to CoreCivic and Geo Group, the for-profit private prison companies. Know who CoreCivic is. Know who Geo Group is. They are our generation's Blackwater. More private detention facilities. That's what we're looking at. Okay, how am I doing on time? Let us get out our calculators, and then I'll wrap it up. It's good to be back. Okay, I'm going to just crunch some numbers here for you because the Democrats don't do this for you. And if you see the numbers, it's very clear what's happening, how the wealth is being transferred from the poor to 5 families. Okay. To refresh your memory, 2026 fiscal year begins on October 1st, 2025. For some reason, I don't understand it, but the fiscal year doesn't begin on January 1st. It begins on October 1st. I don't know why. I'm sure there's a perfectly unreasonable explanation. Okay. There was never a budget for 2025. Never. They couldn't pass a budget, just a series of continuing resolutions. They couldn't pass a budget. I think this is going to pass. I do. And if you look closely, a lot of these massive cuts that the Republicans are proposing won't go into effect until after the 2026 midterms. In other words, Americans won't feel it until after they vote. Let's just do some adding and subtraction here. So if you can, write this down. The total budget for 2025 comes out to $6.3 trillion. $6.3 trillion. That's what the federal government, I'm going to go slowly here because these are big numbers and people's eyes glaze over. $6.3 trillion. In other words, it costs $6.3 trillion to run our federal government. But I'll explain to you what a budget deficit is. Okay, it costs $6.3 trillion to run the federal government in 2025, but the total revenue that we get in taxes for 2025 turned out to be $4.8 trillion. The tariffs, something I think we're going to get $59 billion from these tariffs. It's nothing. Okay? So, this year, the government spent $6.3 trillion, but only received $4.8 trillion in taxes. Do the math. The math is our budget deficit. Our budget deficit for 2025 is $1.5 trillion. That's our budget deficit, $1.5 trillion for 2025. That means we added $1.5 trillion to what we call our national debt. There's the deficit and then the debt. We added $1.5 trillion to our national debt, which currently stands at $36.2 trillion. So what does the debt mean? It means we have to issue $1.5 trillion worth of treasury bonds to cover the budget deficit to pay our bills. Treasury bonds are maybe when you were younger, your grandparents bought you a savings bond that's issued by the federal government, and it comes due in 30 years. So that's how the government borrows money from grandma. She spends $5 on a $100 bond, but the government doesn't pay the $100 bond until grandma is being eaten by worms. Okay, so $1.5 trillion in debt this year. To pay that debt, we issue treasury bonds, and you have to pay interest on treasury bonds so people will buy them. So we're borrowing $1.5 trillion this year. We're borrowing it by selling treasury bonds. But in order to entice people into buying those treasury bonds, those bonds have to pay interest, which makes the $1.5 trillion cost a lot more than $1.5 trillion because we're paying interest on it in the form of bonds. Our entire debt right now stands at $36.2 trillion. So all the budget deficits throughout the years, that contributes to the debt. Each year, one year we're $2 trillion. If it's a $2 trillion budget deficit one year, then our debt increases to $2 trillion. Our entire debt is $36.2 trillion. All of that is in treasury bonds that pay interest. And in order to pay interest on those bonds, we have to take the money out of the current budget to pay interest on the bonds we issued for the $36.2 trillion. And just to pay the interest to the bondholders, this year it cost us $600 billion in interest payments. So imagine a credit card where you owe $36.2 trillion. I've been there. Okay, you have a credit card, you spent $36.2 trillion, you're not going to be able to pay it off. You have to pay $600 billion a year in interest on what you owe. But instead of paying Visa, the money goes to the people and institutions who purchased your treasury bonds. Instead of paying Visa, instead of writing a check to Visa, you issue a bond, and people buy the bond, they buy your debt, and then you pay them interest on the debt and eventually pay them the full value of the bond. That's interest, $600 billion this year. And that comes out to roughly 10% of our entire budget. So the federal budget, you can divide into three buckets. There's interest on the debt. That's one bucket. And then there's a bucket for what is called discretionary spending. And then another bucket for non-discretionary spending. So, what's the difference between discretionary spending and non-discretionary spending? Non-discretionary spending is untouchable. It's also called mandatory spending. It's Social Security. It's Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, food stamps, federal retirement, pensions, veterans benefits. It's untouchable. It's mandatory. Although this year, Republicans are touching food stamps and Medicaid. So not so mandatory. What they're doing is targeting poor people. Food stamps and Medicaid targets poor people because Republicans figure poor people aren't going to vote for them. They're not going after Medicare or Social Security. They wouldn't touch because old people vote for Republicans. Okay, so that's mandatory spending. For 2025, mandatory spending came in at $3.9 trillion. Mandatory spending, have to spend it. Does not include our military. Our military falls under what is called discretionary spending. That's the other bucket. The third bucket is discretionary spending. So there are three buckets. There's interest on the debt, there's non-discretionary spending or mandatory spending, things you have to spend money on, and then there is discretionary spending, money that we can debate on how we're going to spend it. The military is considered discretionary. In other words, we could decide, we have the discretion one year to decide we're not going to spend anything on the military this year. That could happen. Sure it could. Is anybody still here? So, discretionary spending for 2025 comes in at $1.8 trillion. By the way, I have a treat. If you stay with me, I have a treat I have a day in the life of Stephen Chung, Trump's White House press spokesman. So you're going to love this. So there's dessert coming. Okay, discretionary spending for 2025 is $1.8 trillion. I put the bad stuff at the end. This is to help you fall asleep. Hang on for 1 second. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, are you still here? Okay. Is anybody here? Okay, where am I? Discretionary spending 2025, $1.8 trillion. Okay, the House bill for 2026 totals $6.2 trillion. So with all these cuts, all the pain that they're causing, it's only $100 billion less than 2025. That's all they're able to do. $100 billion less. They're going to throw people off food stamps, off Medicaid. They're going to kill people to save $100 billion. So write that down. Servicing the national debt in 2026 is projected to be more than $800 billion. That's the first bucket. Servicing the debt, that's $200 billion more than 2025. That makes sense, right? Anybody who's had a credit card debt knows if you don't pay it off, the interest on it grows. Let's turn to mandatory spending, what we have to spend for 2026. That comes to $3.9 trillion. So even though they're cutting food stamps and Medicaid, mandatory spending stays the same. They're not making a dent. They're killing people. They're trying to kill people. Not making a dent in the budget. They make a dent in discretionary spending for 2026. It's $1.7 trillion. It's basically the same as 2025. Defense spending, as I said earlier, $971 billion for 2026. $971 billion for 2026. It means it's going to top $1 trillion. And that is so please pay attention to this. This is really important. For the year, we're not talking about 10 years down the line. We're talking about for the year. The Republicans want to give a $150 billion increase in defense spending. What do you think Russia is spending this year on defense? What do you think? They're waging war in Ukraine. What do you think Russia spends on defense? $150 billion total. And they're at war. We're increasing our defense spending by $150 billion. Russia's entire defense bill is the raise we're giving the Pentagon. Iran spends anywhere between $8 and $16 billion a year on defense. You got Steve Witkoff negotiating with the Ayatollah. They're building up these got to have imaginary enemies. So Iran, they spend $8 to $16 billion a year on defense. That includes weapons for Hamas, the Houthis, and Hezbollah. We spend a lot on defense. A lot. And that's discretionary spending. That leaves for discretionary spending in the Republican budget that got passed in the House. When you take away the military, that leaves us with $819 billion for everything else, but more imaginary enemies, border security. Gotta spend billions on border security. Homeland Security in 2025 got $67 billion. By the way, that's Kristi Noem, who finally got her makeup right. She finally listened to me. She's getting her makeup right. So $67 billion for Homeland Security. That covers FEMA, which is a disaster this year. Tornadoes hitting the Midwest and the South. FEMA nowhere to be found. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the governor of Arkansas, begging Donald Trump for FEMA money. Not there. She called him up. Sarah Huckabee Sanders called up Donald Trump and she said, he said, I'm not interested. Republicans want to raise spending on Homeland Security in 2026 to $111 billion. That's a 65% increase. That's $44 billion more on Homeland Security. Well, where's that going to go? Detention camps. That's where it's going to go. Right, Tom Homan?
If I may, I'd like to describe what I see first thing in the morning when I change my bed sheets. I see blisters, sores, bumps, blood, redness, and a thick, viscous, foul-smelling fluid oozing everywhere. And that's just my wife, Marie, sleeping next to me. She is a foul-smelling variety pack of dripping lymph nodes and venereal discharges.
Boy, for an elegant man, Tom Homan sure has a foul mouth describing his wife. It's a terrible way to describe your wife, Tom Homan. Detention camps. That's where the money's going to go. Remember they used to say they can't arrest all of us. They can. The Department of Justice has charged Congresswoman LaMonica McIver from Newark with assaulting federal agents after she was denied entrance into a for-profit ICE detention facility in Elizabeth, New Jersey. Attorney General Pam Bondi says the Congresswoman refused a plea deal. She said, the Congresswoman said, why am I going to plea here? I didn't do anything wrong. If you saw the video, you know this is, once again, straight out of the fascist playbook. Arrest a female black member of Congress. By any means necessary, arrest a female black member of Congress. She accidentally shoved an ICE agent. You know, they're such delicate flowers, these ICE agents. And this is what fascists do. They clutch their pearls over the safety of federal police officials while at the same time offering $6 million to the family of Ashley Babbitt, who died threatening the lives of Capitol police officers. The hypocrisy is the point. That's why they're doing it. It's nihilism. That's one of the organizing principles of fascism. Nothing matters because it's not supposed to matter. What Trump values one day, he devalues the next. The police are sacrosanct until they're not. They're sacrosanct when they're protecting Republicans, when they're protecting Democrats. They're part of the deep, dark state. No logic, no reason when you're under a fascist regime. Now, we're not under a fascist regime, but this is, as Jason Stanley says, Republican politics. This is how Republican politics work. We're not a fascist country. We have a fascist leader. With fascists, it's muscle, hatred, intimidation, and violence. Violence. The more violent you are, the more likely you're going to rise to the top. In the past, they said, Sewer, I don't remember his first name. He writes for Atlantic. He wrote an article called Cruelty is the Point. This time around, the flagrant hypocrisy, I believe, is the point. Border crossings are at their lowest number in years. FBI, U.S. Marshals, the DEA, the ATF, the Bureau of Prisons have all been called in to round up migrants. Phantom enemies don't exist. They're not there at the border. Phantom enemies, much easier to fight than real ones like Vladimir Putin. FBI Director Dan Bongino announced 2 new investigations. Our FBI, busy. The FBI is going to investigate who was behind the cocaine found inside the Biden White House back in 2023. Important investigation. And the FBI will also investigate the 2022 leak of Samuel Alito's Dobbs decision overturning Roe. Remember, his decision got leaked before it was announced. FBI going to devote a lot of manpower, women power, to finding out who leaked the Dobbs decision. Imaginary enemies. Because you can't do anything about Putin. Russia just fired 900 drones at Ukraine over the past 3 days. On Sunday, 12 Ukrainians were killed, dozens injured after 298 drones and 69 missiles struck civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. Aerial attacks on Ukraine are now the worst since the Russian invasion began in 2022. Ukraine reports 3 massive, unprecedented aerial attacks this month alone. And Trump says he's stumped. Stumped, doesn't understand it. Said he'd have this thing solved before he took office. Over the weekend, he said, not happy with Putin. And then he called him absolutely crazy. He called Putin absolutely crazy. I don't know, maybe with all this, the cryptocurrency and the money they're making, he's able to pay back some of what he owes the Russian mafia. Maybe that's giving him the courage to call Putin crazy. Trump saying yesterday, Putin's killing a lot of people and I don't like it at all. Then Trump asked, what the hell happened to Putin? And then he said, Putin wants all of Ukraine and this will lead to his downfall. He doesn't know what to do about Putin. Yeah, it's not so easy dealing with a real enemy, is it, Donald? Much better fighting DEI, transgender athletes, Venezuelan invaders, migrants, phantom enemies. Much easier than real enemies. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said yesterday Trump's suffering from, quote-unquote, emotional overload. Trump said he's entertaining the idea of more Russian sanctions. Yeah, the same way Republican senators like Rand Paul and Lindsey Graham are entertaining the idea of voting against the big, beautiful budget bill. They're entertaining the idea. Germany's new Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, now saying the EU is putting zero restrictions on how Ukraine uses the uses the weapons given to it by the West. Merz stated there are no longer any restrictions on the range of weapons delivered to Ukraine, neither by the United Kingdom, France, nor us. There are no restrictions by the United States either, unquote. Which means the EU, Great Britain are saying these missiles that we're giving Ukraine can now be fired deeper into Russia. Gaza Health Ministry reports 53,000 Palestinians have been killed since fighting between Israel and Hamas began in October of 2023. At least 52 reported killed in Gaza on Monday. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you for staying with me. It's good to be back. Sorry I went too long. Stephen Chung is Trump's White House press spokesman. You don't see, for some reason, we don't really see him, but he's there. And he's my favorite White House employee. And I put together a little day in the life of Stephen Chung. saluting. He's saluting. All right. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. It's good to be back. That is AI. That is so you can Photoshop if you take a pizza. What I did is I took a pizza and I Photoshopped it onto Stephen Chung, and then you type in what you want him to do with the pizza, and I spent 2 weeks just looking around at artificial intelligence. I'm not making this observation, someone else said it's nuclear power. If we don't do something about this, it's really dangerous. I mean, it's like it's in that scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark where the Nazi looks in and says, it's beautiful. And then it's, I don't know what we're going to do about AI, but I'm having fun with it. I mean, I don't know. All right. Thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room. To those of you who wrote to me asking, where are you? I thought I told everybody, but I took 2 weeks off. I'm trying to when I do this show, I'm trying to organize chaos. I'm trying to read the news and just organize it. And then by taking time off, it allowed me to, all right. What am I supposed to tell you to do? I forgot. Like this episode. Leave a comment. I read all your comments. Whatever. Oh, did you hear me on Sam Cedar? It was 2 Fridays ago. I was on. That was great. I hadn't done the Majority Report in a year, and that was the most fun I've had. That was so much fun. So check out, it was about 2 Fridays ago I was on the Majority Report. Okay. I don't know when the next show is, but it's maybe tomorrow. I don't know. Okay, thank you. Thank you to Bob and Mila and all the other stuff.